A launch now planned for early May. Look at Home Depot shares. They're making the biggest acquisition ever to try and win over more professional contractors. They're buying SRS Distribution for about $18.2 billion. Those shares ended down about 0.6% in today's trading. Again, the S&P 500 ended up 5 points, up 0.1%, 52.54 on the index. The Dow was up 47 points. The Nasdaq Composite Index closed lower, down 20 points, down about 0.1%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tim and Carol.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. All right, folks, a couple of stories on Tesla we wanted to get to. Tesla shares, by the way, down 2.25% at the close for the Thursday trade.
And you said it was the worst performer this quarter, right?
Yeah.
In the S&P 500.
Right, or so far this year, right? Yeah. It's down about 30% so far here in 2024. Couple of stories. First of all, the company planning to fend off cheaper competition from China with a $25,000 electric car. And Tim, that's not all.
It's not all.
No.
It's not a Tesla story, but it's an Elon Musk story. No real easy segue here. Twitter, X. It's too easy. Triple X?
You want to call it Triple X?
We're supposed to call it?
Just go
Testing
there.
adult content groups. Yeah, I mean, this is a... I'm at a loss for words, Carol. Go ahead, save me. Go ahead.
Which is, we have two great people who are never at a loss for words are going to help us with this. Let's get to our roundtable. Bloomberg News senior technology reporter Dana Hull. She is there in our San Francisco bureau. Also with us, Bloomberg News technology reporter Kurt Wagner, joining us from Denver. Kurt, by the way, also the author of Battle for the Bird. So let me start with you, Dana. Let's start. So tell us about Tesla's plans to buy a less expensive car, to build a less expensive car, and how easy it is for Tesla to do it, because he's talked about this before, doing a less expensive car. So break it down for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is of huge interest to the investment community. And, you know, basically a year ago, Tesla kind of announced at this 4-hour-long investor day that they were working on a new assembly process that is either called like unboxed or modular assembly. And like, I've been waiting to see, like, is the company ever going to say more about this? And they haven't. So I just kind of did a deep dive and talked to a lot of experts. And the auto industry is watching this very closely. Like, if Tesla can pull this off, it'll be another big step change in reducing costs. And everyone is like under enormous pressure here in the US to reduce those costs, because the electric vehicle market is a global market and we are seeing incredible competition from China. So Tesla basically is like throwing out the assembly line that Henry Ford invented over 100 years ago. And, you know, they want to build cars in the way that like a kid builds Legos, like all modular, like much smaller factories that they can build faster. And I mean, I'm just very curious to see if they can pull this off.
Dana, how can they pull this off? I mean, there's a reason things are done on an assembly line, and there's a reason why that was so pioneering, as you write in your piece. It's not easy to build a vehicle, and I would imagine that if you could do this in a modular fashion, then others would have been able to figure this out by now, no?
Well, I think that, you know, I mean, Tesla has always been willing to take risks where Detroit and Germany have not, and this is kind of a continuation of what Tesla learned with the Model Y. They started to move from stamping panels to gigacasting them, and I think this sort of modular assembly or unboxed assembly process is an extension of that. And you know, Musk himself is very bullish on it. You have engineers like Lars Moravi who are kind of leading the charge on this, and I think they're actually farther along than they have let on. And it's just going to be hugely interesting. So whenever, you know, people talk about, oh, Tesla is like down in the dumps, they don't have a new car, like everything hinges on this next car, I keep trying to remind everyone, it's not just that they're building a cheaper car, they are like completely reinventing manufacturing yet again. And that's super interesting. It's very unprecedented that they would just completely redo their assembly line. It has a lot of risks, but it could also be the way that they prevail.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's such a key point here. And reinvention is something, it sounds like, and Kurt, let me bring you in, when it comes to X, although Tim is calling it Triple X.
Is reinvention going to be your segue here? I'm just waiting to see.
All right, don't judge me, don't judge me. Tell us what Elon wants to do over at X.
Well, I was honestly wondering what the segue was going to be. That was a pretty good one, if I had to pick. So what we've seen is that X is testing the ability for people to create and join private groups, what they call communities on the service, but specifically that are intended or include adult content or not safe for work content. And so those groups will, have a label that sort of specifies that. If you're the owner or the creator of the group, you need to go into settings and specify that there's that type of content in the group so people are aware. Again, like this stuff exists on Twitter or X right now. I think the idea of sort of maybe putting it into a group and giving it a destination for people to go to is certainly an interesting way of leaning into the fact that, this type of stuff is already out there.
You know what's interesting, Kurt? Maybe I'm super naive about this stuff, but I got retweeted by somebody with a lot of followers last week, and in my replies, I actually got some adult content, and I reported it to Twitter because I thought that's what you're supposed to do, and they got back in touch with me, and they were like, it's actually allowed to be here, which surprised me.
Right.
And they didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, it is allowed. If it is, nudity or sexual content, it's supposed to be flagged by the person who uploads it, and then it's supposed to go sort of behind like an interstitial where you would have to say, yes, I want to see this, right? So it doesn't just sort of like show up in your feed unannounced. But, I don't think everyone does that, and I don't think Twitter or X now catches all of the stuff, especially in replies. When that happens. And so they do have rules around this that are supposed to make it a little bit less visible, even though it is allowed. But I just don't know, one, how often people are going out of their way to follow those rules, and two, if they're really enforcing them in the way that, they claim that they should be.
Dana, you follow Elon just like Kurt does. I mean, you have for a long time. I'm just thinking about it. It feels like he's out there, again, working on a lot of stuff. And it's just interesting in terms of, as you said, you want more specifics on what he wants to do when it comes to the car side and the Tesla side of the business. I don't know. He's someone who sometimes puts out time frames and he doesn't meet it a lot of times. So how are you thinking about it? And, how soon do investors kind of want some specifics on what they're doing? Because they've been really pretty down, as we said. Worst performer in the S&P 500 this year is Tesla.
Yeah, I mean, Tesla said that they are going to begin production of this car, this next generation vehicle, in the second half of 2025 in Austin, Texas. And between now and then, I would expect that we would hear a little bit more details. I don't know if they're going to have another investor day. Obviously, they have a shareholder meeting coming up sometime in the spring. The big question for the stock in the short term is like, how many cars did they deliver? But the next wave of growth really hinges on this next vehicle. And we've seen Tesla come out with a lot of products, the Cybertruck, the semi-truck, Optimus, that haven't really moved the needle for the stock. I mean, what's going to really drive the stock going forward is this next wave of growth. And so that's why investors are like, what do you know about Unbox? And I'm like, well, I don't know a lot, but so if you are a supplier or an engineer, we are eager to learn more. But some companies like CareSoft have done models, and like they think that the savings is there, and they think that it's financially doable, it's technically feasible.
Call Dana. She's at Dana Hall on X.
You can find her on the terminal too.
She's not.
Well, there is. I do have some sort of transition here back to Kurt, because Tesla, Dana, as you've pointed out, has a lot of different products, and Elon Musk has thrown a lot of of diverse things at the wall when you think about their products, from Optimus to Semi and Cybertruck. Kurt, when we think about X and what he's doing at X right now, I listened to the Don Lemon interview last week or the week before, and one of my takeaways is that it seems like he's trying to make X the internet. And like everything you can do on different apps and services on the internet, he wants to be able to do on X. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. He's talked about this as being an everything app, right? And everything, genuinely, he means everything. He means payments. He means video. He means, apparently adult content. Like, there's nothing that's really off limits in terms of what he wants X to be able to do. The way I'm viewing it is more like he's seeing it as an entertainment app, right? Versus maybe what has historically been like a news app. That's certainly the pivot that I see, is like a lot of the content stuff seems to be more towards entertainment. I'm skeptical, right? Not only because I feel like what made Twitter so great was the fact that it was good at news, was the fact that it was the place you opened up when something crazy was going on. Like, that was what made it indispensable. I'm not sure that we need another YouTube, another TikTok, another, whatever adult site. These are the types of things that he wants X to be, but I feel like the thing that was most unique about it is what he's getting rid of.
Hey, real quickly, 20 seconds for you, Dan. A $25,000 car. If Elon can do it and Tesla can do it, that would be certainly a growth driver for the company. Just quickly.
Yes, it would open up their total addressable market by leaps and bounds, and it would allow them to compete with China.
All right, interesting stuff. Always a lot when it comes to the world of Elon.
Mr. Musk.
Mr. Musk, adult content. I'll take the $25,000 car. Okay, I'm just going to tell you.
That
All right,
sounds pretty good.
Dana Hall, of course. Thank you so much, and Kurt Wagner, both of Bloomberg News.
Hey, let's get a check on the latest world and national news for Nancy Lyons in the 99.1 Newsroom in DC. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried says he is sorry for what happened while he defrauded investors of his cryptocurrency exchange. After his statement in court today, the judge sentenced him to 25 years. Late last year, he had been found guilty on 7 federal counts of fraud and conspiracy. Bloomberg's Max Chafkin has been following the case.
I think this is sort of within kind of what a lot of people were expecting. You know, the prosecution asked for 40 to 50. Defense had asked for 5. What we've seen from Judge Kaplan, you know, he excoriated Bankman-Fried. You know, said he lied repeatedly, caused a huge amount of harm, and yet said he didn't think the 40 to 50 years was. He thought that was too severe. So we've seen a bit of a compromise.
Bloomberg's Max Chafkin. In addition to the prison sentence, Judge Kaplan said that Bankman-Fried should forfeit more than $11 billion. Donald Trump is seeking to have his Georgia election interference case dismissed on First Amendment grounds. Trump's lead attorney, Steve Sadow, told the judge today why he believes the indictment should be thrown out.
Speech, expressive conduct that deals with campaigning or elections has always been found to be at the zenith of protected speech. What do we have here? We have election speech. So one must determine immediately whether that constitutes core political speech, and I suggest that it does.
Prosecutors say it is premature to rule on the nature or intent of Trump's speech ahead of trial. The funeral for former Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman will be held in his hometown of Stamford tomorrow. The giant in Connecticut politics died yesterday after complications from a fall. President Biden calls him a friend who was principled. Global news 24 hours a day.
think about culture is they call organizations superorganisms. It's a collection of people, but the collection is greater than the individuals combined. So 1 + 1 is not 2, ideally it's 3 and greater. So if you were to look at a single person, a person has a set of core values, they may have dreams and aspirations. If you kind of map that to an organization, you can also think of the culture as your core values, personal core values turn into corporate core values, your organization's strengths and weaknesses. All those things collectively combined is something that we kind of put a label on it called a culture. A culture is like a muscle memory. It's very hard to change a habit. It's very hard to just say, hey, today we're going to define our culture as XYZ. We're just going to change this way. Like, it doesn't work like that. It's a collection of people's habits. That's like, again, like a superorganism. So you have to like really nudge and create an iterative feedback loop. It's a slowly evolving thing. So that's why it's so critical. Like your day-to-day decision-making, day-to-day operation, everyday execution is really dictated by the culture of your organization, not by a couple of like checklists. It's not what you write on the wall. It's what you do and live and breathe every day. And that is the culture.
It expects to take on $12.5 billion of debt to help fund its planned purchase of building products distributor SRS Distribution. S&P 500, 5 points higher. That was up 0.1% today. Again, a record close, 52.54 at the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 47 points. That was up 0.1%, closing the day at 39,807. The NASDAQ Composite Index was 20 points lower. That is down 0.1%. And we checked the markets.
We're listening.
You are not listening.
That Home
I'm
Depot
like,
deal.
am I being
You know
too...
That was so like being in a classroom
Home
and the
Depot
teacher
deal.
caught you. You were talking about.
You were a couple of cut-ups.
I can't believe they're taking
Go to
on
the back of the class.
You know, we used to have a
taking
colleague.
on debt in this rate environment.
Do you know we used to have a colleague
Oh,
here?
you actually did listen.
I did listen.
See, now they're not.
Yeah,
they're
no,
not listening
Home
to me.
Depot is kind of trying to
Are you
shift more
mansplaining Home
toward...
Depot to me? This is
More-
a hammer.
He is
him.
He is
He asked the
This is a
remodeling.
question.
saw?
John is remodeling a
Okay.
bathroom.
Oh, you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, what was I saying? Home Depot trying to shift more toward the professional
Yeah.
instead of the schmoes.
Yeah.
Like
I bet the margins
myself.
are better on that. Don't
You ever go to Home Depot? You know they have parking spaces, pro
All right,
parking
all right.
only. I always park.
I'm cutting
there.
you off because you're
What, are they
talking
gonna give me a
Home Depot and
ticket?
You're looking at Tim and you won't look at me, so I'm kind of hurt. So
Well, I have a question for you.
maybe later we'll talk.
I have a question for
Go
you,
ahead.
Carol.
Come on, Tim,
You remember
let's
the
do it.
food pyramid?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so
Big time.
maybe it's because I'm a quote elder millennial, but this thing is just seared into my head. It's actually was up in classrooms as a kid. It was everywhere.
Yeah.
The food pyramid, it actually hasn't been around for more than a decade. Now we have this newish plate, which is divided into 4 sections. It shows fruits, veggies, grains, proteins. There's a little glass of milk for dairy.
Yeah.
On the side, despite the plate, the FDA says
We're not doing so well.
we're
are we?
not doing so well. We're not eating the healthy stuff. We're eating too much sugar, fat, and sodium.
All right, so why is this and how can we do better? We've been looking forward to this segment. Let's get to Dr. Yilai Moy, who is Assistant Professor of American Health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, of course, supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, which is the founder, I should say, of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Dr. Moy joining us from Washington. Dr. Moy, so great to have you here with Tim and myself. How bad are we doing, and why aren't we doing better?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me join. You know, we really need environments and systems to make healthy eating the easy choice. And so I like to think of it as a puzzle of some sorts where you really need different pieces to come together to support healthy eating. So what do I mean by that? When we think about healthy eating, one piece of the puzzle that gets a lot of attention are supermarkets, right? So individuals or families access to the nearest supermarket. But healthy eating is not just about access, physical access to supermarkets. There's much more to that. And there are often other pieces of this puzzle that get overlooked. And as a result of this limited picture, the food environments and our systems we navigate on a daily basis, unfortunately, fall short in supporting healthy eating being the easy choice.
What are the other things that we overlook? I think that's an important area we should go into. What is it?
Absolutely. So one example, or thinking about cultural factors. Are the foods available reflective of the cultural values and traditions of individuals and families living in a community? So if I think about my Chinese and American background, for example, I grew up eating a wide variety of leafy greens, which we know are nutritious for us. So for me in my household, this involved bok choy, sesame leaves, bitter melon, and these kinds of vegetables are not readily available in your average grocery store. Another important factor that often gets overlooked is thinking about the affordability of healthy food options, right? So fresh fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, these tend to be more expensive than your ultra processed and fast foods. And when we think about these socioeconomic factors, there's also time costs and time constraints. Maintaining healthy eating and maintaining a healthy diet requires time for planning, time for food shopping, getting around to different food sources, and also for preparation.
What about, there's so many areas I want to go in. I want to start with this idea of schools and the food that's available in schools, because that's top of mind for me right now. I have a young child who is in a public school in New York, and I'm shocked at the lack of healthy options still in this day and age that, in my opinion, are in the schools. He tells us what he has for breakfast. Sometimes it's like a muffin. They serve breakfast, by the way, at school.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. But even talking to neighbors, the lunch options in high schools are like mozzarella sticks still.
Sure. So I think what more schools are doing is taking a more holistic approach to addressing the type of healthy food options available in public institutions like school. So as an example, there are more schools that are adopting what's called the Good Food Purchasing Program. And it's a more holistic approach in thinking about the broader food supply chain. So sourcing from local food producers, creating the infrastructure to support the distribution and transport of those foods to institutions like schools. So it's a really innovative, wonderful program that's being adopted in other public institutions increasingly across the country.
I should clarify, he eats a meal at home and then he eats a meal at school, Carol, because he's my son.
He's so like you, right?
He has to eat right when he wakes up.
Well, I want to be, Dr. Moore, I feel like we've talked about a lot of these things for a long time. And I guess, I don't know, so what's some simple advice, affordable advice for people who are just trying to do the right thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of strategies at the local level. So when we think about where people can access affordable fresh foods, I think there's often a lot of focus on supermarkets, but one of the downfalls of that approach is that we overlook a lot of other existing community-driven food security resources and assets that already are present and available. So for example, smaller grocers, community gardens, local cooperatives, farmers markets. So I think if we can broaden our scope and think about the diversity of ways that local governments can support these other types of healthy food resources, then consumers will have more options to
I was going to say,
go to.
I went to school in New York City, and I used to love all of the grocers. It was kind of uptown, and they were just every market, and you could just buy lots of fresh, all kinds of vegetables, fruit, and it was just so much fun.
It depends on the neighborhood in New York, but a lot of places you're really lucky with what you have around you. Dr. Moy, what about, how much of this can fall on like the big packaged food companies, fast food companies? I mean, how do you think about their role here?
Sure. I mean, I think it's hard to, you can't really disregard the influence of big food industry like fast food companies. I think where local governments can play a role in this is through how local governments, through their policies, determine the design and development of their communities. For example, through land use policies or zoning policies, local governments can decide what neighborhoods look like, where supermarkets can go, where there are opportunities for urban farming or food production in your community, where there can be community gardens, and also thinking about the transportation infrastructure that's needed to help consumers be more mobile in getting to these different food sources. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for policies at the local level to make healthier choices the easier choices.
See, and I thought this was going to be a conversation about the Mediterranean diet.
No, it wasn't.
No, interesting. No, some serious issues, though, for people certainly across the country and trying to figure out how we can do it better. All right, so appreciate it. Dr. Yilai Moy, Assistant Professor of American Health at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, as we said, supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And yes, I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom, with a look at company news. A group of lawmakers says the Federal Trade Commission should enforce a rarely used antitrust law after finding that large retailers like Amazon.com and Walmart increased profits during the pandemic and have kept prices high since. The FTC concluded in a study this month that the largest grocery stores gained a competitive advantage over smaller rivals during the pandemic supply chain crunch, in part by threatening to fine suppliers if they didn't deliver items on time. In a letter to the FTC chair today, the mostly Democratic members of Congress pushed the agency to bring cases under the Robinson-Patman Act. Rite Aid and Amazon Pharmacy confirming that Eli Lilly's new weight loss drug Zepbound is in short supply as patient, pharmacist, and doctor complaints mount. The Food and Drug Administration doesn't currently consider the obesity shot in short supply. Lilly has said the drug is available for pharmacies across the U.S., yet multiple pharmacists across the U.S. are telling Bloomberg that some or all of the doses of the drug were on back order as demand has soared since the shot's launch back in December. On the website of Amazon Pharmacy, for instance, which has a partnership with Lilly, 4 doses of Zepbound are listed as unavailable. And inside Eastman Kodak, the once iconic camera maker, a small pension investment team, has reaped huge gains in recent years. The group manages a pool of retirement assets for more than 37,000 people. They poured money into hedge funds and private equity And in 7 years, they've turned a $255 million deficit into a surplus of $1.1 billion. And that's some of the company news we're following.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get a check of the latest world and national news with Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Tim. Disgraced crypto boss Sam Bankman-Fried has been sentenced to 25 years for stealing billions from FTX customers. Prosecutors had sought 40 to 50 years. His lawyers wanted 6.5. Loyola law professor Laurie Levinson.
Even though the prosecution had asked for 50 years, 25 years is a significant sentence and in line with other high-profile white-collar criminals.
Loyola's Laurie Levinson, the 32-year-old Bankman-Fried, was convicted last fall of stealing massive amounts of deposits before FTX collapsed and then using the crypto to make investments, buy property, and to donate to political candidates. Well, President Biden tonight is hosting what his campaign is describing as the most successful political fundraiser in American history. He's expected to raise $25 million for his re-election campaign at the New York event that's being held at Radio City Music Hall. Presidents Clinton and Obama will be there, which Biden's press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, says is significant.
These are presidents, two former president, the current president, that believe in what we're trying to do in the Biden-Harris administration, trying to move this country forward, trying to make sure we're protecting our democracy, protecting our freedom, building an economy that leaves no one behind.
The highest paying donors at the event will have access to perks like a photo with the three presidents taken by legendary photographer Annie Leibovitz. Former President Trump is also in New York. He attended the Long Island wake of a New York City police officer who was shot and killed during a traffic stop in Queens. And the U.S. Census is changing its options for race and ethnicity. Beginning in 2030, it will include checkboxes for Middle Eastern or North African, as well as Hispanic or Latino. It's the first change to ethnic and racial demographic collection since 1997. Major League Baseball is back. It's opening day. Well, the Astros lead the Yankees 4-0. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Carol and Tim.
All right, thank you so much. Nancy Lyons, have a great weekend. That's going to do it for us.
No, it's not. Not yet. We have 2 more minutes. John Tucker's still here.
John, you got any words of wisdom in these last couple of minutes?
Oh, I failed to mention that the Dow Jones Industrial Average also ended today's session at a record. Not just the S&P 500.
People don't care about the Dow, isn't it?
Well, it's 30 stocks, so I mean, I have to confess I really don't because I'll go by the S&P 500.
Yeah, I care about it.
It used to be like it's really amazing how we used to like really just that was the benchmark we cared about. But thank you.
Now it's all about the S&P.
Yeah, it's like the popular gal in town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, John Tucker.
Yes.
How's the bathroom remodel going?
It's you really don't have a lot to talk about in the last 2 minutes of your show. It's going. It's going. I will spend
finish it this
all
weekend?
this weekend. No, I'm preparing the walls. I'm in the phase where you do the studs, the 2x4s.
Okay.
Wow. You're gonna put up some wallboard?
You're framing.
Do some spackling?
I think I'm going to hire somebody to do that because I'm just I'm getting too old for this stuff.
It's hard. It's kind of tough on the back there.
It's tough on every part of John Tucker's body at this point.
I hear you. I know it's tough.
Let's leave some of it to the professionals.
Get to employ others. It's good for the economy. I know you thought we had nothing to talk about, but the most read story on the Bloomberg in the past hour.
What is it, Carol?
Is actually a story from our interview with Lauren Huckfelder, co-chief executive officer of Morgan Stanley Real Estate Investing, and what she had to say about older U.S. office buildings.
Yeah, she said that many older offices will be stranded because they simply don't have long-term cash flow growth potential. She said those assets just don't meet modern tenant demand. They don't meet them from a standpoint of quality or amenitization.
Just wanted to share.
But she did point out on Wall Street where, some of the older buildings, they've been converted to really high-end, luxurious condominiums. One of the problems with converting old real estate like commercial buildings is really the plumbing. I mean,
Yeah,
there was only
it's
a
so
couple
true,
of
the
bathrooms on each
bathrooms,
floor.
Which, if you watch our weekend show, we'll talk about the shortage of plumbers that's out there. Our own little economic indicators. Just call me Segway Sue.
And believe me, they're expensive.
8 a.m. Bloomberg Radio tomorrow. Catch our podcast feed. Thank you, team. We can't do it without you. Have a great weekend, everybody. Balance of Power starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lines.
Happening now, President Biden in New York City en route to an event where he's expected to raise over $25 million. Former Presidents Obama and Clinton also in attendance. Biden's campaign calling it the most successful political fundraiser in American history. We'll talk about it ahead with Kyle Kondik of Sabado's Crystal Ball.
Plus, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying he talked with House Speaker Mike Johnson and briefed him on the situation on the ground, even as further aid for Ukraine stalls in the House. We'll break it down with Angela Stent, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution and author of Putin's World.
And tomorrow, marking 1 year of captivity in Russia for American journalist Evan Gershkovich. 1 year. We'll be joined by former Wall Street Journal Washington Bureau Chief Paul Beckett ahead of the anniversary of the arrest. Remarkable, Kaylee, to think that 1 year has gone by, and looking forward to talking to Paul here on a day where we have a lot of cross currents and a big event ahead on the campaign trail tonight, maybe one like we've never seen.
Yeah, certainly the news doesn't seem to be as much here in Washington today as it is up in New York, where not only will President Biden be with this multi-million-dollar fundraiser alongside two former presidents, but another former president, Donald Trump, was also in New York today attending the wake of an NYPD officer.
Yes, that's right.
And talking about crime.
Well, it's an interesting contrast, and we'll get into this now along with our other top stories with Bloomberg's Mike Shepard and Laura Davison with us here at the table. Laura, what do you think of the optics involved here? I remember the celebrity ad back in the McCain-Obama campaign in 2008 with Paris Hilton getting out of a limousine. This is sort of the definition of the coastal elites getting together to support Joe Biden. The contrast, Donald Trump today in New York, is great. Does it hurt Joe Biden?
You know, it really doesn't, because Biden can still go back and say, look, I'm raising $25 million. This is more than twice what Trump raised in the entire month of February.
That's right.
So, and he's got popular figures there. You've got Broadway stars. You've got pop stars like Lizzo. You have Stephen Colbert, who will be moderating a conversation between the presidents in the room. So this is really, to the extent that this story plays out, this is not going to be a factor in November, but the money will certainly be a factor. Biden has this massive cash lead already. Trump is really struggling to catch up, plus still spending millions of dollars a month on legal fees. Yeah, sure. So this is sort of the play. And clearly you see the way that Biden's team is touting this. They're very happy with this event. They think this is a good thing. Plus they can say, look, tickets, the starting ticket was $250 to get in the room. If a regular person wants to come, you can enjoy, this whole spectacle at Radio City Music Hall.
It's still a $500 night out.
Yeah, well, or if you want a picture with all three presidents, $100,000 is what that'll cost. Yeah, it's definitely a pretty penny. So $25 million, obviously a massive haul, one night only. You add that to the $155 million Biden and the DNC already had in hand when the month of March began. That's like 3 times what Trump and the RNC have. The thing is about it, though, Mike, Biden is still lagging in the polls. He has all of this money at his disposal. He's showing off his fundraising prowess, but Donald Trump is leading. So what does that say?
Well, Kaylee, you brought up a really good point about the difference between the money and the polling. In our latest Bloomberg Morning Consult poll of 7 swing states, the ones that will help to decide the election, highlights that gap. Biden is trailing Trump 43% to 47%, and he has to look for ways to close that gap. The money will help, but also unifying that Democratic base, which has had some misgivings with the president over his age, and then certain key voting blocks within the Democratic Party, including Black and Latino voters, have had some misgivings about Biden for seeing in his administration a failure to deliver on all the promises. So bringing, and this is a rare appearance, joint appearance by Biden and his two Democratic predecessors, that is a really rare moment where he can maybe reach out beyond the immediate Biden base and maybe close some of that gap in enthusiasm.
When we consider the disconnect with the polls, as Kaylee illustrates here, he's got time. And we talked about that today. Consumer sentiment at its highest level since July. We're actually seeing, or at least his campaign might be, green shoots when it comes to the economy. That may not play out 8 months from now, but I'll tell you, the director of public affairs at Ipsos, Cliff Young, talked to us about this earlier today, about the trajectory that could play in Biden's favor. Here's what he thought.
Obviously, time's not in Biden's favor. Anytime an incumbent's down because of the economy, the question is, can you gain that ground quickly enough? But what's happening now is what we expect. And the economy's improving, people perceive that, and we're beginning to see, at least on the Biden side, glimmers of hope when it comes to numbers.
So, Laura, I guess the question is, how much time does he have? We keep hearing people aren't even paying attention yet. In real America, those of us who are absorbing this every day are not normal. So do we need to see improving data or evidence of a soft landing late summer, early fall? What is it?
That's really when people start to tune into the election, right around that Labor Day time period. Though Biden needs to start making up ground before then. There in still these swing states, he has a pretty wide delta. And, to make up that gap, that's not all going to happen in 1 or 2 months. And of course, there's the infamous October surprise. Anything could happen that can really blow this race wide open. Because again, you're really only talking about maybe tens of thousands of voters who are going to be these swing voters that are going to decide the election. So it really matters, what is happening in the upper Midwest, what is happening, on the border. You have, Nevada and Arizona that are key swing states. So there's a couple, kind of specific things that may have an outsized reaction on this election.
Well, you bring up the border, Laura, and we know that Republicans have a very big issue with not just the border, specifically the way this administration has handled it and done so through the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who of course was impeached by the House. We learned today by Speaker Mike Johnson announcing they will send those articles of impeachment to the Senate when everybody's back from recess, April 10th. And then it dies immediately. How is this going to be handled?
They're still figuring that out and trying to, what are they going to do to handle this? Neither Republicans nor Democrats want to take this up. The question is, Mitch McConnell is on his way out. His influence is waning. And is it the more Trump faction of the party that says, hey, look, we should deal with this and do something more? Of course, this eats into the Senate's time. As we remember from previous impeachment trials, we're getting good at this, that, all the activity stops. All the senators are sitting there on the floor listening to the various sides argue the case. So there's things like Ukraine aid, Baltimore Bridge aid, all of these things that folks are wanting to turn their attention to now that all the spending drama is behind us.
That's right.
And so those are going to be the competing forces at play.
Well, we're all curious about how Baltimore Bridge aid is going to be received whenever this emergency request emerges. The governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, talked about the collapse at the opening day for the Baltimore Orioles. Here he is.
Baltimore is being tested right now. But Baltimore has been tested before. And every time we stand up on 2 feet, we dust ourselves off, and we keep moving forward. This work is not going to take hours. This work is not going to take days. This work is not going to take weeks. We have a very long road ahead of us.
What he means, Michael, is years. We hear 7 years possibly and $2 billion based on reporting at Bloomberg. That means cars aren't driving over that bridge until after the next presidential term. It will not be Joe Biden or Donald Trump who witnesses that. What are they going to experience in this debate over funding this spring, however?
Well, what we're seeing already is a little bit of a partisan split. President Joe Biden the other day said that he expects the federal government to pick up the full cost of reconstruction. But now we're hearing from some Republicans who say that the owners of the ship that struck the pier, that supported the bridge, and that prompted the bridge's collapse should bear the financial cost. How do you actually make that happen? It is much more complicated given that it's a foreign owner. And also, it may take much longer to get that money back, if at all. And what the city of Baltimore and the port of Baltimore and all those commuters you mentioned and all the port workers and all that commerce need is for that bridge to be reconstructed. More immediately, they have to focus on recovery. The remains of the 4 missing workers, first and foremost, this was a terrible tragedy that cost 6 people their lives. And then the blockage to the seaway, to the Patapsco River. It is a huge engineering endeavor to just simply clear all of that ahead of any reconstruction.
Yeah, I was out there yesterday. Conditions for this effort are certainly suboptimal. The water has been choppy, the visibility is low, and of course, they're also dealing in those waters with a ton of extensive debris from the bridge and from the ship itself. Mike Shepard and Laura Davison, thank you both so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time. Now, another story that we've been following today, FTX co-founder Sam Bankman-Fried is sentenced to 25 years in prison for stealing billions of dollars from customers. U.S. District Judge Lewis Kaplan delivering the sentence in federal court in Manhattan moments after Bankman-Fried said he was, quote, sorry about what happened at every stage. He faced as long as 110 years behind bars after being convicted last year of 7 offenses, including fraud and conspiracy. Now, still ahead on balance of power, the Republican House majority is getting smaller and smaller. Kyle Kondik of Sabado's Crystal Ball will be with us next, right here on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
Welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down that path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
This group of Senate races, really in every election going back to 1994, which was the Republican Revolution when Newt Gingrich and the Republicans flipped the House and the Senate that year. One of these years, the Democrats are going to have a really bad election on this map. They're hoping it's not this year, but they do have a lot of vulnerabilities, and Maryland is just added on top of all that.
Okay, so Kyle, while we're having a conversation about whether or not the Senate majority can stay the majority come January, we're also having a conversation about how the House majority can barely stay a majority right now because of all the retirements. Ken Buck's last day was last week. Mike Gallagher is going to be gone in a couple of weeks. We're talking about a margin of 1 vote here that Speaker Mike Johnson has to work with, while a motion to vacate filed by Marjorie Taylor Greene is hanging over his head. Just how unique is this moment for the vulnerability of a majority?
Look, I mean, we wouldn't really have any actual modern precedent, or really much precedent at all, for the House potentially changing hands during an actual Congress. The only comparable example I could think of was way back in 1930 in the midterm. The Democrats won a bunch of seats, but they came up just slightly short of winning the majority. But back then, the House didn't open until the following December of 1931. A bunch of special elections in that time frame. Democrats ended up, winning the House in that little interregnum period. But, look, if there were some more vacancies, you could see a situation where temporarily maybe the Democrats could actually have a majority and elect a speaker for a short amount of time. And even if it doesn't happen now, it could happen in the future, given how closely contested the House is these days.
Well, that would be incredible. Look, some Democrats have offered to potentially help protect Mike Johnson under certain circumstances if a Marjorie Taylor Greene or someone triggers a motion to vacate. The question is, what's the price? Are we talking about a power sharing agreement? Or, Kyle, would it be, in fact, floor time for a bill to fund Ukraine?
I mean, that's what's being, is being discussed. And look, I mean, in some ways, we're not really dealing with a traditional majority situation in the House right now, because Speaker Johnson has had to rely on Democratic votes through this suspension of the rules process that requires 2/3 majorities to pass some of these must-pass bills. And there are more Democrats voting for these things than Republicans are. So, yes, the Republicans are still in the majority, and they have many of the trappings of being a majority, but usually in the House, one party can be unified and pass the things it wants to pass, but that's just not the case in the House right now. So the Democrats do have some leverage, and they may have some leverage if someone tries to topple Johnson as Speaker.
Well, and then it becomes a question of would it actually be a Hakeem Jeffries speaker after that potentially, or is someone else going to have to try and potentially fail, as we saw play out several times this fall once Kevin McCarthy was vacated? Obviously, though, Kyle, there is still, before the general election in November, a number of special elections that could help decide really how the House is balanced in the interim. Is there one in particular you are watching that has the potential to surprise?
So unfortunately for we election watchers, these special House elections coming up are all in pretty uncompetitive seats. And so once Mike Gallagher resigns, it's going to be 217 to 213 Republican. The next special election coming up is April 30th in New York's 26th district, very heavily Democratic seat. Democrats should get up to 217 to 214 Republican. And then the Republicans are going to fill a few additional seats in May and June and get up to a 220 to 214 majority. But that assumes also there aren't any more resignations or more vacancies, and there's always the possibility at any time there could be a new vacancy.
Of course there is. Kyle, it's good to have you back. We appreciate the time. Kyle Kondik at the University of Virginia, we thank you for the time. Coming up, 1 year since the arrest of Evan Gershkovich. We'll be joined by former Wall Street Journal Washington Bureau Chief Paul Beckett. Coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington. 1 year ago, American reporter Evan Gershkovich was arrested in Russia while on assignment for the Wall Street Journal. Today, he remains in prison in Moscow. Earlier this week, the court there extended Gershkovich's sentence until at least the end of June, a 3-month extension. U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Lynn Tracy, reacting to the news.
The accusations against Evan are categorically untrue. They are not a different interpretation of circumstances. They are fiction.
Back with us now at the table is Paul Beckett, assistant editor at the Wall Street Journal, former Washington bureau chief who has been working on Evan's case full time. Paul, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
Welcome back here to Bloomberg. There are times when it's important to drop our competition and talk about issues of common interest here. And I know that you've been in touch to the extent that you can with Evan and with his family. This news, though, of a 3-month extension, followed by word from the Kremlin, a call for silence, saying that silence is needed when it comes to talk about a possible prisoner exchange. Are you hopeful that something is about to happen?
We remain hopeful. We've been hopeful from
the day it happened, and we remain hopeful. But the 3 months was a disappointment. It's been part of a pattern. They've spent 2 or 3 months, every 2 or 3 months they put him in a cage and we see him and they extend his detention again, and they've done that. We believe there are conversations ongoing. The U.S. government has said that, and we understand that those need to be classified and quiet, but we are going to remain loud until Evan comes home.
Can you tell us anything about his condition now after a year of being imprisoned?
We knew when we hired him he was a great reporter. We've discovered what an extraordinary young man he is. He's in a jail cell for 23 hours a day. He gets 1 hour out in a courtyard that's about the same size as his jail cell, so it's about 6 steps like this. But he's incredibly strong, and he has kept his equilibrium, which we're very grateful for. He meditates, he does yoga, he exercises, he writes letters, and so under the circumstances, he's doing okay.
Does he believe that he'll be back home before we're talking about another anniversary?
I hope he does, and we do. And one of the things about marking his 1 year, which happens tomorrow, is it's a reminder that we need to keep pressing from the day after 1 year until he comes back.
How much does external events that don't actually have specific relation to Evan's case, but given that it obviously is a very tense time with Russia and much of the world and an uneven relationship, if you will, with the U.S., how much do you feel like external factors are weighing on ultimately his fate?
The thing that we have to do is keep him in the spotlight because there are a huge number of distractions. But we also think that this is a business for Russia. This is very transactional. You've seen Paul Whelan's there, obviously, but Trevor Reed came out, Brittany Griner came out. Evan was taken, then Elsa Kurmasheva, the Radio Free Europe reporter, has been taken. This is hostage-taking as a business for Russia. So we believe what Putin has said is that they want to do a deal. We'd just love to see that deal done.
What does he think he's gaining by this?
Leverage over the United States. And these are very, very difficult. If it winds up in a prisoner swap, you do, in effect, hand back a guilty person to get an innocent person. Right. And just in that, you see the mismatch, but our focus is on getting Evan back, and we look forward to the day that he's with us.
We just have about a minute left, but obviously the conversations on the Russian end are one thing. What about your conversations with officials here in the U.S., with the Biden administration?
So they have been very good about giving us attention. Obviously there are things that we hope that they're doing that they don't tell us about, but we know it's got a lot of attention, and we just keep relying on President Biden's promise to Evan's family that he will bring Evan home.
You've had a lot of support from the National Press Club here in Washington and other organizations. Do you feel the support from the news media, from journalists?
It's that one of the silver linings of the year has been support from you guys, from a lot of journalistic organizations all over the world who have been incredibly supportive, and we're extremely grateful for it.
That's great.
Well, and we're grateful for you being here. As always, Paul Beckett of the Wall Street Journal, we appreciate it. Now coming up, we'll talk more about Russia and Ukraine with Angela Stent, Brookings Institution Senior Fellow. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. President Volodymyr Zelensky saying he talked with House Speaker Mike Johnson about the importance of additional aid for Ukraine, the status on the battlefield given the uptick recently of Russian missile attacks on the country. Joining us right now to talk about this and other issues, Angela Stent, Brookings Institution Senior Fellow and author of Putin's World, Russia Against the West and With the Rest. It's great to see you, Angela. Does President Zelensky think that he can personally convince Mike Johnson in this case?
Well, I think he's trying his best to try and convince him, although we do know that the speaker himself, I think, favors aid to Ukraine. We should remember that a lot of that aid will go to U.S. companies that will be manufacturing weapons and things that are delivered to Ukraine. I just want to get that in there. But yes, I mean, the Ukrainians are in a very difficult position now without these U.S. weapons and the U.S. assistance, which they've been waiting for 6 months now. And the Russians have made some territorial gains in the last couple of months. And as you said, they have intensified their bombing campaigns against infrastructure, against civilians. And so, it's pretty hairy living in many of the main cities of Ukraine now.
Well, Angela, of course, for Ukraine to continue making the case to allies that they should continue to provide funding and military support, they've had to be pretty vocal about how dire the situation is when it comes to their ammunition and the like. It's been very public and certainly within the view or the ability to understand of Vladimir Putin himself. Is this kind of a double-edged sword where on the one hand you do have to make the case for why this aid is needed, but on the other hand it could provide even more emboldening to Putin himself?
Yes, I think Putin, he's now just gotten a 5th term in office with allegedly 87% of the vote, although most people don't believe that's a true figure. And he's doing everything he can now. And we know that there is cyber interference in trying to dissuade Americans and Europeans, who, by the way, are actually supplying more than we are at the moment. But he's trying to persuade particularly people in the U.S. that they shouldn't be giving assistance to Ukraine, that, Zelensky's government is weak, that it's corrupt, and that they should understand that this is a useless task. And I think we're seeing an uptake now in these Russian disinformation efforts within the United States.
Angela, we heard from President Zelensky today in an interview on CBS News. He was asked about whether the war in Gaza might be diverting U.S. attention and resources, for that matter, away from Ukraine. Take a listen to his answer.
We understand that there is a humanitarian disaster there, but of course it took attention away from Ukraine. It's a fact. And when you lose attention from your region to other regions, then it is obviously good for Russia. Russia knows that the world's help and support is not focused on Ukraine.
Is he right, Angela? Is the war in Gaza good for Russia?
Well, I think in a number of ways it is. And, obviously our diplomats, Secretary Blinken, other diplomats, we're so focused on trying to resolve the humanitarian situation in Gaza and trying to work out some kind of a deal where the Israeli hostages can be released in return for possibly a temporary ceasefire. All that has taken the attention of many people in our administration. And so in that sense, he's right. And the Israel-Hamas war has also been good for Russia in the sense that Russia has come down squarely on the side of Hamas and the Palestinians and has gotten a lot of international support for that. And I think that's also what President Zelensky was alluding to.
Well, of course, it was just earlier this week that the UN Security Council passed a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. The U.S. abstained. Meanwhile, another UN Security Council resolution today was blocked by Russia. This was a resolution to extend a panel of experts that reports on North Korea's development of its nuclear arsenal and has done so for 15 years. What is the signal to you, Angela, about the relationship between Russia and North Korea and how much closer it is becoming?
Well, this is a really major development, in the last few months. We know now that the head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, Sergei Naryshkin, was in North Korea for 3 days this week. We're not quite sure what he discussed with his intelligence counterparts in North Korea, but clearly closer cooperation. They said that it has to do with threats from the West and other countries. Vladimir Putin has said that he's going to visit North Korea. I don't think a date has been set. We now know that the Russians are exporting oil to North Korea in defiance of international sanctions. So we now have this new axis of powers that's emerging as a new bloc: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And this rapprochement between Russia and North Korea has been very notable, because Russia used to be, at least publicly, much more concerned about North Korea's nuclear program than it appears to be now.
Angela, we just spent some time talking with Paul Beckett from the Wall Street Journal, who's been dedicating his time to securing the release of Evan Gershkovich, now in prison, being held by Russia for 1 year tomorrow. They just extended his detention by 3 months. We've been hearing from the Kremlin. The line was, silence is needed. Complete silence when talking about prisoner swaps. Is that how this will end this year?
Well, let's hope that it ends soon. Unfortunately, the Russians usually wait until the individual has been convicted, which in the case of Brittany Griner, for instance, was so, before they will release someone. But yes, of course, it has to be secret, because if you divulge details, that could, threaten the success of the deal. Unfortunately, Mr. Gershkovich and the others Americans who are wrongly imprisoned in Russia are also hostages of the deteriorating U.S.-Russian political relationship. And of course, this is what makes it much more difficult. There are stories now that some kind of a deal was in the offering while Alexei Navalny was still alive, which would have involved Mr. Gershkovich and I think Paul Whelan and Navalny himself being exchanged for this Russian assassin who's in jail in Germany. But we know that, of course, that fell through once Navalny was no longer alive. So I think we just have to wait and see what happens and try and be hopeful, as your previous guest was.
Well, and we remain hopeful, of course, for Evan's release as well as Paul Whelan's. But the question then remains, even if their freedom can be secured, are others just going to be next? Is this now how this works with Russia? That's essentially what Paul was alluding to with us. This hostage taking is a business for them now. Who will be safe in modern day Russia?
And this is why anyone who goes to Russia at the moment should think very carefully about what they're doing. Their State Department warnings about this. Yes, we've seen that. We have a Radio Free Europe reporter who's now imprisoned. We have a teacher who used to teach at the American school in Moscow that's no longer open now. He's in prison. So yes, I mean, this is the way the Russians appear to be increasingly doing business, as countries like Iran have been doing for some time.
All right, Angela Stent, it's always great to have you here on the program. Thank you so much for joining us. She, of course, is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Now, coming up, President Biden holding a big event tonight at Radio City Music Hall in New York. He'll be joined by his two Democratic predecessors as well. We'll dive into the details next with our political panel on that $25 million haul he's going to rake in tonight. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Former presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton tonight joining forces to help boost fundraising for President Biden's re-election campaign. They are all three set to appear at Radio City Music Hall for a celebrity-filled event tonight in New York City, and they're going to raise $25 million while they do so. Let's bring in our closers for this discussion. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, with us on a Thursday this week because of the holiday tomorrow. So wonderful to see you both. Jeannie, $25 million going to be pulled in part because everybody who wants to take a picture with all three presidents has to pay $100,000 to do so. And we know that Biden has proved his fundraising prowess in recent months. It's not at this point, though, buying him much better polling figures. So is it about raising the money or about putting it to work in your favor?
It's about both. And, you know, this is probably the biggest night in Democratic politics since Biden's inauguration. The numbers are astounding. I hope you and Joe are saving up to get your picture, $100,000 for a picture with the three of them. And it's quite historic. And this is a huge, huge boon for Joe Biden. Not only is it the money, which is critical to your point, Kayleigh, he needs to raise it, he needs to spend it, but also because there's nothing more important for the grassroots and the Democratic Party than seeing these three figures come together. And it's quite a picture opposed to Donald Trump, who doesn't have the support of any living president on the Republican side or vice president, even his own former vice president in terms of Mike Pence. So they are, you know, it's a good night for Democrats. I'm in New York. It is rainy and it is crowded and there's gridlock out there. So you wouldn't want to be driving out here today.
Well, you got to get in line right now, Jeannie. I'm fascinated by the optics here, Rick. Presidential campaigns are supposed to be about the future, right? The next generation, hope, looking across the valley, city on a hill. I could keep going with cliches. Could you have imagined running John McCain's campaign to have a Bush and a Reagan on stage? Is this backward-looking thing speaking to Donald Trump more or Joe Biden's age more?
Oh, I think it's just speaking to donors. Yeah. Donors love, you know, popularity, leadership, famous names. I have a lot of fundraising envy tonight. I mean, like, they have real entertainment. Republicans have the same country western bands every single time. I mean, we don't rent out the Radio City Music Hall and have a full show. So, yeah, I think it's something that I think everybody wants. Mm-hmm. Don't give the donors what they want. They're not going to pick up any votes tonight, but they're going to get enough money to go and try and communicate with a lot of voters. And that's what this is. It's the yin and yang. Phil Gramm, famous American politician, said, money is the mother's milk of American politics. Yes, and tonight, it's mother's milk.
Okay, so what we've learned is that Rick Davis wants Lizzo, Queen Latifah, to be at his next event. To the point Jeannie, though, was just making about how you're talking about the establishment being behind Biden and the Democratic Party, whereas they are not behind Trump. Isn't that what works to Trump's advantage, though? That's part of his appeal, is he's not the establishment. So I just wonder if that contrast is something that works more for him than against him.
Yeah, well, he did lose the last election with that message, right? And so what's new this year that wasn't true in 2020? And so I think if I were the Trump campaign, I'd be worried that this message of exclusion is not as successful as the message of inclusion. And so, sure, it's a nice thing to be an outsider. It's a nice thing to be, you know, a former president. How does a former president be an outsider? Some of that is very much in contrast. And so I think that this is the contrast with the two campaigns. Joe Biden is selling a positive image of the country and an establishment figure. His biggest problem is the liberal left, and you're kind of, you know, sort of covering over that. And Donald Trump's the fighter where the country's a mess, and you need someone like him to rescue it from all these, you know, negative influences, many of which are government themselves.
Swamp people.
And, yeah, swamp people. So I think that you're going to see that in stark contrast. Donald Trump's going to be in New York, too, probably stuck in traffic along with Jeannie.
That's right.
And he's going to be talking about how horrible New York is and, you know, cop killing, you know, people all over the city. And he's going to do it in a way that is, again, part of that picture of how dark America is.
That's fascinating. As the man who created the famous celebrity ad in the 2008 campaign, when you were working with John McCain, this was about Barack Obama, Paris Hilton in a limousine. Jeannie, does that matter anymore for Democrats being associated with coastal elites? They're hanging out with celebrities and a bunch of money, big ritzy night in downtown Manhattan. Is a Rick Davis going to make an ad about that, or it doesn't matter anymore because you're running against Trump?
You know, they could. I'm sure they will. You know, they're already calling out Joe Biden for calling in the troops, calling in Barack Obama earlier. Remember, Barack Obama used to be the closer. He probably realized Rick and I do that now, so he's coming into the campaign really, really early this time. And they're already fundraising off of that, saying this shows, you know, what trouble Joe Biden is in. But they have the same envy Rick does, which is that 25 million in a night. And just to go back, you know, there's a lot of people who are attractive here to young people, not just, you know, we were talking about Queen Latifah, Lizzo. We also have Stephen Colbert. They also have Mindy Kaling. So they have a lot of talent out there who are appealing. So, you know, I think they're jealous. They'll try to use that old line, but I don't think it's going to fly.
Well, even if they're jealous of the money, there are some things that money can't buy, specifically free media coverage, whether it's in a court or, as you were alluding to, Rick, you're attending the wake of an NYPD officer who was shot in the line of duty, using it as an opportunity to talk about crime, not having to spend money while doing so, other than maybe the cost of getting to Long Island from Trump Tower or Bedminster or wherever he was. Does that playbook work just as well as spending millions of dollars on ad buys?
You know, it's worked pretty well. This is a pretty typical play by Donald Trump to sort of crash the party. He likes these alternative, what we call bracketing, right? Go in, go out, you know, and try to take some of the media that's already reporting in that market. It's kind of lost on me as to why he would spend 10 minutes in New York City, though, right? I kind of get the idea of crashing a party, but wouldn't you want to crash a party in a market like Charlotte, North Carolina, or Phoenix, Arizona, or someplace where it's actually going to matter to you on the ballot? Because at some point, Donald Trump's actually got to win states. And it's not just about the national media, which he adores kowtowing to. It's just a basic political calculation that these states may not be as attractive as New York City for him, but it's where the people are going to vote. And I doubt if that many people in Maricopa County, Arizona, are worrying about what Donald Trump's doing in New York City today.
How about that? Coming up, we'll stick with our panel. Rick and Jeannie have more to help us remember U.S. Senator and Vice Presidential nominee Joe Lieberman. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down that path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
when I was younger, I used to be in bands. I'd play drums in bands and toured America with them. Did a lot of session drumming, recorded albums. So yeah, it was good fun doing the drumming. The only reason I stopped it, well, I still play, but not as serious as I did when I was younger. But drumming doesn't pay the bills. I was never good enough to be able to pay the bills with it, but it was good fun. I started RJF, and the reason I started it was I saw a gap in the market for particular early stage and startup businesses. With the experience that I've got of running businesses, of being a finance director at the very biggest companies in the world to being finance director of small startups, we were looking at providing more than just basic accountancy services. So yes, we'll do all that. We'll do all the basic, all the statutory side of things that you need to do. But there's so much more value that we can add, and I wanted to have my experience to help these startups, because a lot of them don't really know where to go. You can go to your high street accountants and they can do a good job compliance-wise, but you would question whether they've actually been in the fire line of a business. Have you been in a business where you're thinking, how do I pay wages next week? Or business is really successful, what do we do with it next? Or how do we grow it? How do we grow into international territories? Or how do we grow our markets? How do we expand? So a lot of the experience I've seen over the years and seen different types of business in different sectors, I thought, well, it's a real value that I can add to these businesses as opposed to just being an FD, because a lot of these businesses can't afford an FD. But if we can take care of their statutory side of things, the compliance side of things, I'm on hand to be able to help and advise businesses with their growth strategy, or if they're in difficulty, help them through these times.
A dear friend, if not John McCain's best friend. I can only imagine what you thought when that news broke yesterday. How should he be remembered?
Yeah, first of all, I was shocked, and, condolences to his wife and family. I know they're going through quite a bit right now. I don't think anybody anticipated it. I know a lot of people who were talking to him even early this week. He seemed vital and full of life. And you're right, Joe. He and John McCain were brothers, right? Inseparable. Flew all over the world, talked to people in every walk of life. And I remember Joe Lieberman even rang the bell for us in 2007. In a Republican primary, we call up Joe Lieberman, a Democrat, and said, hey, all your buddies are staying down in Florida. We got to win Florida. Could you go down and campaign on the Gold Coast? And he's like, in a minute. How many people have Democrats campaigning in a Republican primary for him? But he headed up McCainocrats in the general election and took a lot of gas from the Obama folks. But the two were inseparable, part of the Three Amigos. And I know they're probably together now and cooking up some kind of storm for us in this election cycle. Great, Rick.
Well, of course, the third amigo, Lindsey Graham, had a nice note he put out when learning of his passing. But as we talk about Lieberman and John McCain, for that matter, Jeannie, and kind of what they represented, do they make them like them anymore?
You know, they don't. I grew up in Connecticut. He was my senator for many, many years, and also a state legislature. And that's one of the things that was unique about him. He came up through the party. He was incredibly moral. He was incredibly friendly and congenial and supportive. And when Bill Clinton had his trouble, he was the first person on the Democratic side to step up and say this is unacceptable. He was basically kicked out of the party because of his view on the war in Iraq. He came back and won an independent seat and served Connecticut in that way. But I think at this point, when we think about him, the fact that he and Al Gore walked away gracefully from a Supreme Court decision that ended the 2000 election is something we don't see today, obviously. So I think in that perspective and so many others, he is unique in American politics and much, much missed.
All right, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis, thank you both so much for as always, for joining us and for your reflections on the legacy of Senator Lieberman. And of course, you continue to get Washington coverage. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
We'll miss you here tomorrow. Meet you back here Monday. Thank you for joining us on Balance of Power with Kaylee. I'm Joe. This is Bloomberg.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.